Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video I'm back with another Big Brother ranking, where last year I did a ranking that I thought was pretty fun in ranking every first HOH in the history of the show. However, here we're going to take that one step forward and do a second HOH ranking, which, I mean, initially does seem like a random concept, as obviously who has ever thought through ranking the second HOHs of Big Brother? I mean, I never did until making this video, but I think it is actually kind of an interesting thing to do, especially considering the fact that there is this trend with Big Brother US, where the second HOH has never won the game in Big Brother US, and usually technically second HOHs don't go particularly well. So again, I thought it would be fun to do this exercise and rank them all. Now again, I will only be including the mainline seasons here. Obviously, the seasons with HOHs, which obviously naturally you would think that's 24 people. However, there are actually 25 people on this list because there were technically 2 HOHs and BB9. So again, we do have 25 players to rank here. Again, this will be a ranking purely based on how they played their HOH week, not based on how they were as players. I feel like that is a radically different list. But with that, let's get into it. Let's start the ranking. At number 25, the worst second HOH in the history of the show, to me, is sadly Hisam from Big Brother 25, which again, sucks to say considering I love Hisam. I thought he was great TV, but I mean, this is a pretty astronomically bad HOH, where again, there are a lot of bad second HOHs. However, I feel like this is the only one where Hisam actually came into this in a pretty good position, being part of the majority alliance, only for his alliance to completely turn on him by the end of the week and have the entire house on board with backdooring him the following week. Like, that is an astronomically bad HOH. Again, there are many that we're about to be talking about where people come into the HOH in a bad spot and leave in an even worse spot. But Hisam's a situation where he came in a good spot and then lost all of that, only to be the number one target the following week. And it is really, really bad. And a lot of it does come down to his gameplay. I mean, a lot of it does come down to the way that he talked to people, the way that he didn't really allow them to give their say, the way he was trying to make deals with the other side, or made his side sketched out. Like, again, it is due to his gameplay. I will say, I do think one of the things he does probably wouldn't have been as detrimental against the more normal cast that wasn't so willing to flip-flop constantly, but still, Hisam definitely played a really bad HOH week, and that is why he's here number 25. Number 24, we're moving on to, again, Hisam's HOH, but just coming in a worse spot, and here we do have Devin Shepard from BB16. Again, I also really love Devin as a character, but obviously, terrible HOH here. Now again, I think the one redeeming factor is not even really a redeeming factor, but is the fact that he came into this the number one target anyway, where coming into this HOH, he was going to be the main target for most of the house, and he really saved himself through this HOH, unbeknownst to him, though he obviously doesn't do anything to benefit himself through this HOH, and really ends up really turning even more people against him, where he obviously gets massive HOH-itis during this week, thinking he could completely run every little minutia of what's happening, especially with the battle block happening, and promising people that they're safe, only to not follow through with that. He also ends up targeting one of his own alliance members in Zach, only for Zach to not even go home, and having this added aspect of not even getting his own target out of the house, which is why I would actually slightly debate this with Hisam, where at least Hisam did get his target out, though even then, barely. But again, I do think it is the aspect of Hisam's fall was much more than Devin's, where Devin's fall already kind of happened at this point and was just kind of still steadily going on a decline. That makes it like not as bad to me, even though again, like, he is still social pariah after this week, the number one target. Almost everyone actively wants to backdoor him after this. So again, like, it is a bad spot, but I do think he had less room to fall, which is why he's here at number 24. At number 23, and here we're moving on to a batch of HOHs where they're in the minority and also end up failing to even get their target out, kind of in line with Devin, though their social capital didn't plummet as much as the last two we talked about. At number 23, we're starting it off with Aaron from BB15. And Aaron, again, is another one of these people that comes into this HOH in a pretty bad spot. Now, she's not the number one target coming into this week. However, she is in the minority. Again, David just got blindsided in the first week, and through that, she's completely left out of the loop on things. However, she's also, again, like, not really this big social pariah in the way that Devin was, and doesn't really even leave this HOH in that spot either. Now, again, she's not in a good spot, where, again, she enters this week in the minority. She leaves this week in the minority, probably in a worse spot, and she entered it considering she obviously loses the fact that the moving company wanted to keep her around as a number, but also becomes less of a primary target through the fact that obviously, like, the likes of Jeremy becomes a bigger target. But again, it is a complete failure of an HOH. Like, she wants to get Alyssa out fails in doing so. Nick gets blindsided out of the game. One of her quote-unquote allies, now realistically, not really, Nick had other loyalties, but at least someone that was kind of on her side and one that kind of wanted to keep her around. Again, it is a bad position there. However, it's a bad position due to a twist. Again, it was due to the MVP twist that she gets screwed over in this instance. But overall, again, like, she doesn't really do much to really benefit her game through this HOH. She loses an ally. She loses some people that are willing to actively protect her. And again, while she's not directly targeted after this, she's still in a really bad spot. However, I feel like it is the fact that she's not directly targeted after this that does have her above the likes of Devin and Heisem, and why she's here at number 23. Now, 22, another really bad HOH, one that comes from an all-time great character, but at 22, we do have Jen Johnson from BB-8. And Jen is another one here, comes to the HOH in the minority, was the number one target for the majority of the house coming into week 2, and she leaves the week also in that same spot. She is still pretty much the number one target for most of the house, though continues to not leave due to other extenuating circumstances. But and she tries to target Dick and Danielle this week. She fails at doing so due to Danielle winning the veto and then Joe getting taken out over Dick. Now, I will say, I don't think she really cared that much about Joe going, which is like a slight benefit in the fact that it's not as much of a failure, considering she also didn't trust Joe and was okay with him going too. So it's like, at least it isn't this complete disaster of an HOH where she didn't get anything she wanted. Mind you, I don't know why she wanted Joe gone, as I feel like there were definitely better targets for her. But again, it's just a similar HOH in the fact that she enters in the minority, she exits in the minority. She doesn't do anything to benefit her game, doesn't really get her target out, and because of that, again, pretty bad, she's here at number 22. Number 21, another really bad HOH, the one that I do think was massively screwed over by a twist, just fundamentally. And at number 21, we do have G from BB4. And again, G's another one. Comes in the minority, leaves in the minority, even in a worse spot, with him having wasted his HOH and getting out Michelle, someone that was a number for him. Though he does also leave this HOH, again, not the number one target. And really, not anywhere close to it, which I think is kind of why it's better than Jen and Aaron, where, again, there were probably routes where Aaron went home if certain things happened the following week. Jen obviously probably would have gone home had she not won the veto. G was pretty safe. I mean, it would take a pretty freak situation for him to go home the following week of, for some reason, Justin and Robert not being put on the block together and then one using the veto on the other to screw over G. And even then, I don't even think they would do that. So again, like, G does come out of this in a much better spot, but it's still an HOH that is bad. He loses an ally. Pawn goes home. However, again, I do also think that he was screwed over by the X Factor twist, just fundamentally in the game, where coming into it, he just was automatically put in the minority because he entered the game late as an X. Now, I will also say it's idiotic for him to not realize this fact and that the others have an alliance against him, but still, it's like, I do feel like he's still screwed over by a twist and does have some minor positives that leave him here at 21. Now, number 20, we're moving on to an HOH that I think is really bad, where this person comes in a pretty good spot, leaves in a pretty bad spot. This is one of the bigger falls. However, at least gets their way through the week and still has some allies. And at number 20, we do have Ronnie from BB11. And again, Ronnie came into this week in a pretty good spot. He was in the center of the house. Both sides thought that they had him, though obviously he just betrayed one side by voting out Brayden. And coming into this week, he obviously gets caught with Laura fully figuring out that he's the one to play both sides. Though even then, it doesn't really matter that much, as he is targeting Laura at a point. He does put up Laura and Jeff. Jeff wins the veto, and Laura ends up going home. And it is exactly what he wanted. The problem with this HOH is the fact that he wanted to, at one point, backdoor Russell, which I think is a move that you can kind of argue for his game. However, the fact that he openly tells numerous people about this plan and then just simply doesn't go through with it, obviously making it so that Russell finds out about this plan and then starts to directly target him and obviously antagonizes him for most of the week. It's, again, pretty poor play there, and it does ruin his position. We're coming out of this, a lot of the house is targeting him. Obviously, the side that he betrayed in week 1 is targeting him, but even beyond that, now Russell is also targeting him. And even the likes of Kevin and Lydia were willing to let him go. Now, again, he did still have allies in the fact that Jesse, Natalie, and Shima still wanted to keep him around, but it is a bad HOH. It definitely is one where he completely sunk his entire game. But again, I still feel it's an HOH where he does still technically get his way, and he does still have allies, which is why it's here, number 20. Number 19, another really bad HOH. But when that, again, like she comes out of it, not the number one target for most people. And at number 19, we have Caitlyn Herman from BB20. And again, this is terrible. I mean, she takes out the leader of her core alliance because she's manipulated by Tyler into doing so, burning a lot of her relationships with her original alliance in the process. Now, I will say again, like she isn't the immediate target following this. While she does burn some relationships, and there certainly is talk about taking out Caitlyn, I do still feel like the likes of Brett and Winston were bigger targets over her, to where most of the other side would have gone for them first, where obviously the level 6 side of things wouldn't have gone for Caitlyn either. Again, like despite this being a pretty terrible play and her really sinking her own position in the game, she's still not dead to rights following this. Now, she is probably, in terms of winning the game, as I don't know who's going to vote for her to win, but in terms of longevity, like she still had a decent amount of longevity at this point, and like again, technically gets her way. She didn't want Swaggy gone. So again, it is those minor pauses that leaves you here at number 19. Now number 18, we're moving on to another really bad HOH. Who would have guessed? But again, one where she technically got her way. But at number 18, we have Rachel Riley from BB12. Again, this is another situation where Rachel's on the bottom coming into the HOH. She's on the bottom coming out of the HOH. Nothing really changes, which is bad, as obviously you would want her to change things. But again, like at least she gets her way. She does get Monet out, who is her target from the very beginning. And also, Monet isn't as bad of a target for her as someone like Swaggy was for Caitlyn. Now, I will say there were definitely better targets, and I do feel like a lot of the reason why she wanted Monet out were for personal reasons, not for game reasons. But again, like Monet is still a decent target. Monet is someone that was going to come after Rachel. Now again, were there better targets in the likes of the Brigade? Yes, but she still technically gets her way. She still technically gets rid of someone that isn't bad for her game. So there's enough minor pauses there to leave her here at number 8. Now number 17, we're moving on to an HOH that kind of feels in a similar vein as someone that got their target out, but doesn't really do much to really better their position throughout all of it. And at number 17, we do have Marvin from BB5. And Marvin is kind of this interesting case here where, again, I think he's certainly above the last few we talked about, where he's an HOH that does get rid of his target. His target is Lori, and he gets her out, weakening the other side of the house, the side that he's not working as closely with, as he did have alliance with the 4 Horsemen at this point. However, he's also on the bottom of the 4 Horsemen, which I think is an issue. The fact that he is taking this shot for this alliance that he's not really even that integral to, but also it's like, I don't know what the better move would have been. I don't think there really is that much of a better move here, to where like that's why I don't really fault him too much for the actual decision to target Lori, but he doesn't really do anything to better his position through this week. Again, he gets rid of his target, but is still on the bottom of his side of things despite that, and is also in a spot where he's being targeted by the other side more than some of the people in the actual alliance, where like so Drew and Cowboy are much safer in the game than someone like Marvin at this point. Now, I will also say something else a bit strange about his HOH is the fact that he does nominate Holly initially, which feels misguided. It just feels like a move that potentially burns trust to the likes of Jace and Scott, and considering that was like Marvin's main alliance at this point in the game, I do feel like that's also a strange move. So again, definitely things I don't love about this HOH reign, but again, he at least gets his target out. He's not in immediate danger. So again, that's why he's here at number 17. Now number 16, moving on to another HOH where they come into it in a bad spot and they leave it in a pretty bad spot, but again, at least get their way. And at 16, we do have Marcellus from BB3. And again, Marcellus comes into this HOH on the bottom. He was almost out week 1 had Jerry not used the veto on him, and coming into this week, he does end up doing some decent work. He does end up making deals with the likes of Josh and ends up securing his spot in the game a little bit, but it doesn't end up mattering though, which is a bit of an issue. While I don't think he necessarily plays this HOH the worst, where he does end up putting up Josh because most people expect him to, but then ends up targeting Tanya instead, who is probably a better target here to kind of cause a fracture between the men and the women of the opposite side of things. However, at the same time, I don't know if he purposely did it that way. It does feel like he targeted Tanya more so as a personal move, as he just didn't like her, but it does actually end up being a pretty decent move strategically, but one that again he doesn't really see the dividends of, where despite this move being one that could have easily fractured the majority alliance, they don't really, and Roddy wins the following HOH just to put him and Amy up anyway, to where again he could have potentially gone home the following week. And again, it's just kind of a weird HOH where I don't think he necessarily plays it terribly, but he doesn't really gain anything from it. Well, again, I just feel like it's a bit of a strange HOH where he comes into it in a pretty bad spot. He comes out of it in a slightly better spot, but is still being talked about as a target for numerous people in the house. And again, it is the fact that he does gain some social capital through this week, that he is higher than all the people we talked about so far, but it is also the fact that he proceeds to be on the block the following week that makes it tough to put him much higher here than number 16. And with that comes a very similar spot for number 15. At number 15, we have an HOH that, I'll be honest, I was a bit perplexed on what exactly to do with this one, as it's in a very similar case to Marcellus, though some higher highs and some lower lows. And at number 15, I do have Frank from BB14. And again, Frank's in this interesting spot here where obviously he is on the bottom coming into this HOH, not necessarily numbers wise, but more so in the fact that he was obviously on the block and could potentially gone home. He wins HOH and plans on targeting Willie. However, Willie obviously gets ejected. However, following that, he does still make probably the optimal move here in going for Brittany's team and targeting Shane and JoJo. Shane obviously would have been his ideal target. Shane wins the veto, or JoJo ends up going instead. I think it is a mostly solid HOH week. It's one where, like, considering the circumstances, I think he plays it pretty well. Now, does it work out for him that well? Not really. I do feel like he comes out this week kind of in a similar spot where, and there are definitely people that want to protect him, and he definitely has some allies, but there's also a lot of backdoor potential for him. But really, I mean, the reason why I think I have Frank above Marcellus here is the fact that I do think he comes out of this HOH probably in a better spot than Marcellus, where with Marcellus, again, there was always this talk about nominating him against Amy, and he could potentially be in danger. While with Frank, again, while there is certainly a lot of danger for Frank, and we do literally see it the following week where he does get backdoored and almost goes home, only being saved by a twist, it's still a position where I think he gets kind of unlucky that that situation happens, as I feel like only Shane and Danielle were the only people that were actually going to do that move, and kind of gets unlucky in the fact that Shane obviously just kind of wins out here, and the fact that he wins the veto, then wins the following HOH, and then following veto, which allowed Shane to make that move. And even then, the deal that Shane and Frank made the previous week almost made it so that Shane didn't make the move. So again, I do feel like there is good play here from Frank across this week. I don't think he plays this week that poorly. I think concerning the circumstances, he does do his optimal strat where, I mean, I know people talk about how like he should have gotten rid of Danielle instead of JoJo, as through that Dan would have been taken out of the game. But I mean, come on, they wouldn't have actually done that, would they? They would just move up the date that the coaches entered the game. So again, like, I just think as a whole, I don't think he plays this week that poorly, and that's why he's here at number 15. Number 14, we're going to another pretty similar HOH here, and here we do have Jesse from BB10. And again, this is an HOH where he sticks with the majority, does what most people are going to do in targeting Steven, putting him next to Dan, does make some deals along the way, again, does make a deal with Dan, comes into this HOH again, kind of in the majority group that was, again, not super solid, but ends the HOH still in that group. Mind you, that group was starting to fracture to where there's essentially two sides, and obviously the following week, Keisha wins HOH and puts him on the block as a pawn because he's on the other side of that majority alliance. So I guess through that, you could argue the fact that his position actually went down through this HOH. But again, I don't think he does that much wrong through this HOH. I think this is probably the move he should have made. I think he's really just doing what a lot of the house would have done. I don't think this is a move that completely sinks his game. And while like probably in an ideal world, he would have gone for someone like a Libra or a Keisha, I still feel like the way that he plays this week is still just kind of fine. Kind of similar to, again, the Franks, the Marcelluses of the world, though, again, still not coming out of this being a direct target for most of the house. But still, again, comes out of this not being a direct target for most people, which is why he's here number 14. Now, number 13, we're moving on to a player that was another one that was in the majority coming in the week. It was pretty safe coming out of this week, though I think also probably like loses a little bit of capital across the week. And at number 13, we do have Jordan Lloyd from BB13. Again, this is another situation where coming into this week, the vets had the numbers, and really this week just has them really maintaining their numbers. Now, again, I'll have an issue with the fact that they were essentially handed those numbers, considering obviously the vets were always going to work together. But even then, I mean, Jordan does some decent work and building some other relationships through the week. And I do think if it weren't for the veto result, I think this would have actually been a pretty good week for her. Getting rid of Dominic, someone that she wasn't particularly close to, someone who was also a big threat in the game. I think she actually would be a little bit higher on this list had Dominic gone out this week. The issue is that he didn't, and he won veto, and through that, she ends up being essentially kind of forced to put up Cassie and Shelly instead, and Cassie ends up going home, which is not great for her. Now, again, she didn't have many other options, as again, due to the twist, really every option here was pretty bad, and her taking out Brandon and Rachel, who are obviously these massive shields for her putting up Kalia and Lawan, where while Lawan isn't a bad target for her in this spot, again, putting up Kalia would go against a deal that she literally just made, so again, that's not a good look. Well, Cassie and Shelly, again, is getting rid of Shelly, someone that was probably willing to work with Jordan and Jeff, especially more so than the likes of Dominic. So again, I do think this is just a pretty bad spot for her. Again, I don't think she necessarily plays the week that poorly, but I do feel like she loses some social capital across this week through the loss of Cassie. And again, just overall, just kind of an okay HOH that didn't play out optimally due to the comp results. But again, for me, she lands here 13. Now, number 12, we have an HOH that I find a bit strange to assess. I feel like this is one where when I initially think of it, I think it is pretty bad. But then I think when reassessing it, it's not as bad as I remember. And at 12, I do have Kaser from BB7, which is bad. And obviously the fact that he doesn't target Chilltown. And that is a big mistake. And the fact that Chilltown remains in the game are obviously these big power players in the game that do eventually lead to Kaser's later eviction. But I could see the argument for this actually being the move to make. And this is a move that I remember I always used to be super frustrated with. However, I think when actually looking at the game board here, targeting Nokomis is actually not that bad of a move in the fact that Nokomis and Diane were directly coming for Sovereign 6. Obviously, Kaser being a massive target on that side. And again, I do think the likes of Will and Boogie are probably people that are more acceptable to a deal. Now, again, are they going to stick to it? No. I don't think his HOH is the worst thing in the world. Now, ideally, he would have swapped that in targeting Will and Boogie and try to make a deal with Nokomis and Diane. I do think just the general concept of the HOH is not actually that bad. Where again, he was coming into his HOH a pretty big target for a lot of the house and kind of comes out of it at least with deals that could potentially keep him safe. Do they stick? No. But I think kind of like Jordan, he was just kind of in a non-winning position here. He was kind of in a position where there was no real great move to make unless he was able to somehow flip the entire power structure of the house, which, considering the massive target that were on the backs of BB6, I just think is very unlikely to happen. So yeah, I do feel like as a whole, I don't look at this HOH as bad as I remembered, and because of that, for me, it's here number 12. Now number 11, moving on to an HOH that I probably found the hardest to rank here, as this is an HOH where the overall house structure coming into this week and also leaving this week was a bit fractured, and I don't feel like this person played optimally during his HOH week. However, still got his way and still comes in and out of the HOH in a similar spot, and that person is James from BB9, where, I mean, obviously, again, he shared HOH with Chelsea, which we'll talk about. But again, James comes into this HOH in a decent position. Again, still, I mean, having a feud with the likes of Amanda and Alex, to which during this HOH, they target Amanda and Alex and end up getting Amanda and Alex out. So again, he gets his target out of the game. He also leaves his HOH, again, kind of in a similar spot. He still has Joshua and Sharon as massive allies. He still has some social capital, some of the other pairs as well. However, I think the main thing that's making me a bit hesitant with how he plays his HOH is his dealings with Matt, where I do think he does some pretty suboptimal play here in making a deal with Matt, telling him that he's not going on the block, only to then put him up on the block, which really just burns social capital of Matt, shows that he's not trustworthy, which does play a factor later on into the season, and also makes enemies of Matt and Natalie, where again, they probably would have targeted him had they won HOH the following week. And again, that's bad. So again, I think it's a tough thing to reconcile here, where again, like, he technically gets his target out. I think it probably was the correct target on paper, though again, I think he has suboptimal play there. So again, still overall an okay HOH, and which is why it's here at number 11. Now number 10, we have literally the same thing, but slightly better, with Chelsea from BB9, who literally, again, plays the exact same as James. Again, positioning wise, a lot of the same things being said. However, the reason why she's above James is because, again, she didn't make the deal with Matt that made Matt upset at them. So at least there's that. At least there's that minor benefit of her not messing up as much as James did. But really, again, outside of that, it's pretty much the same. Comes to the HOH in a decent spot, comes out of the HOH also in a decent spot. Maintains a lot of her allies, gets rid of a target that was coming after her. Again, all pretty decent stuff. Bozzy gets harmed by the fact that James makes an enemy of Matt, but really, as far as I remember, Chelsea doesn't play a major factor into that, and that's why she's a spot higher here at number 10. Now, number 9, moving on to an HOH that I'm surprised this person's this high, as I didn't think they would be. However, that's kind of what happens with this list, where most people on this list are pretty bad. But at number 9, we do have Jasmine from BB24, who, again, had a fine HOH. I mean, it's not great, but it's also not terrible. I mean, she does get rid of Pooch, who was probably the correct target for her side, in Pooch being someone that was closer to the guy side of things and would have targeted the likes of Amira, who was a very close ally of Jasmine's. Now, through this week, we obviously still have the mistreatment of Taylor and Jasmine's terrible play with that, as again, Taylor was someone that wanted to work with Jasmine, yet Jasmine just continues to throw her away and treat her poorly. Again, that's bad. But again, she is really safe afterwards. I mean, she comes out of this HOH kind of in a similar spot to coming in. I think she probably loses some respect due to her ankle injury and her really hamming that up and annoying people with that, though I think she also gains some credibility through the fact that she won a comp. So again, I think it's kind of a wash. I think this is kind of just a fine HOH. She gets rid of probably an optimal target. She doesn't really do much to sour her game through this week. She's just, again, coming in and out of it in a similar spot. Just probably slightly more credibility to the fact that she at least won a competition. So again, because of that for me, she's here at number 9. At number 8, we're moving on to an HOH that is also very flawed. Yeah, again, that's kind of where we're at with this list. At number 8, we do have Christa from BB2, who I think Christa is a solid player. I think she's one of the first to really recognize the benefit of playing the middle, and she does utilize this HOH to play the middle. The problem is that she does it way too blatantly. Like, she is very openly playing the middle and not wanting to go against Chilltown, who she knows are the number 1 targets in the game. She wants to keep them around the shields. And again, it is a move that is good on paper. The problem is that she's not able to get away with this move without obviously having her allies know what she's doing and be sketched out by her for doing this. Where while she is an immediate target following this, she obviously does sever some ties. They do have people realizing that she's playing the game self-interestedly. And she literally has almost everyone in her ear telling her to put up Will and Shannon, and she obviously just doesn't go through with that. Now again, her target of Autumn is a pretty optimal move for her. I think it's getting rid of someone that, again, doesn't particularly like her. It's not someone that she was ever going to really work with, while also still keeping the main players on both sides to come after each other. The problem is, again, just how blatantly she does so. But it's still a decent HOH where she comes out of this pretty safe, and because that, for me, she's here at number 8. Now number 7, moving on to an HOH where, again, it's still very flawed one. At number 7, we're moving on to BB6. We have Eric, or Cappy's HOH, which one thing I'll give him credit for is that through this HOH, he does really become the de facto leader of the house. He is this main player in the majority alliance that's kind of running things, really building this group that would later be this cult around him after his eviction. The issue is the fact that he does so while, one, blatantly getting HOH-itis, again, 100% becoming a control freak, again, 100% letting people know that he's running the show, but also he ends up targeting a former ally of his, where he does end up targeting Michael through this, someone that he had to deal with in week 1, where he had built this bro alliance to keep the guys safe, only for him to immediately turn on that, and then that's poor play. Also, he's targeting Michael felt very much personal instead of game, where, I mean, again, Michael is not a likable person. Again, very creepy individual, and one that did make the women feel uncomfortable in the house. However, it felt like Eric targeted him because of that, not because it benefited his game, which, again, kind of kudos to Eric in terms of that from a personal standpoint, even though, again, I think part of that is his Messiah complex. But again, it's still a move that feels like it's out of the game. And I don't think it benefits his game. I think it harms his game as it further causes this divide in the house. That really makes him a number 1 target for the minority of the house falling this week, where the likes of Janelle and Kaser were directly coming after him. Even Howie was probably going to come after him. He also starts to target James during this week, which later causes this sever between them. And again, it is a faulty HOH. It's one where he makes a massive target of himself through this and gets rid of someone that was working with him before this week. So again, it is pretty bad on paper, but he still does come out of this HOH in a pretty dominant position. One where really the only way he goes home the following week is the way it played out, where even then he barely goes home. Kaser had to pull off the ridiculous move that he did and flipping over James and Sarah and forming this Sovereign 7 to get Eric out, which really felt like the only way he goes home the following week. So again, like, there's at least those minor positives there. Despite some poor play, he's here at number 7. But now number 6, moving on to another one. Very faulty HOH here. And again, really don't like this person, but it was a mostly stable HOH reign. At number 6, we do have Jack from BB21. And I think this is actually an HOH that is kind of the opposite of Eric from BB6, where I think he comes into this HOH in the spot that Eric comes out of this HOH in, being a massive target for the majority of the house, being someone that certain people were going to directly target, also had a good chunk of allies that could have potentially kept him safe. Now, I will say, if he did end up being on the block with one of his alliance members, I don't know how that would go. I could definitely see where he gets voted out, but still, again, he comes into this HOH kind of in that precarious spot, and I actually think he comes out of this HOH in a better spot. Now, he's still a pretty massive target for down the road, though I think he becomes a lot less of an immediate target following this week, and I think it becomes very difficult to even get him out. Where while the likes of Christy, who is one of his closest allies, does end up talking about wanting him out, and you do have the likes of Nick and Bella, who probably would have wanted him out at some point down the road, I do think his target for the next few weeks did wane. Now, part of that is due to camp comeback and through that they were scared to make a big move, but even then, I do think he does some okay work during this week, even though he's a massive asshole. So, I mean, he's still terrible to Kemi, but still, he is targeting Kemi, getting rid of someone that is going after him, so at least there's that. And again, like, if we're just talking about this from a pure game perspective, I do think this overall was a net positive for his game to be HOH this week, and that's why it's good enough to be here at number 6. Number 5, and now we're finally at some good HOHs for the most part. I mean, this one's still a little bit flawed, but at number 5, we do have Memphis from BB22. And to me, this is essentially just a better version of Jax. I think Memphis came into this in a worse spot. I think coming into this, he was definitely someone that wasn't a direct target, but was someone that was kind of being slightly on the outs of the core of the house, where it felt like the house was kind of leaning more so towards Cody and his allies, wanting to work with the likes of Davon and Bailey. However, it felt like through this HOH, it really started to form the committee as the side that the Cody side of things were going to go with, which again further solidifies through future weeks. However, I do think Memphis's HOH here really just sets the tone for the season, which again is a bad tone considering the season sucks, but at least in terms of gameplay, again, like, I do think this is a lot of the reason why the committee ends up truly forming and becoming a real alliance, where it was more so a fake alliance for its early days. And I do think Memphis plays this pretty well too. Now, again, he does have some Christa in him here, of him playing the middle and doing it a little bit too blatantly, him making it very clear that he's not going to target Janelle or Kaser because he knows Janelle and Kaser are targets ahead of him, even though his own allies in the committee are upset at him for not doing so. Again, there definitely is that aspect of it that is kind of bad, but I still think he comes out of this HOH in a pretty good spot. I don't think he really loses that much from that situation, really ends up just further solidifying the committee to be this alliance that really runs the show, which ends up being an alliance that he's in a pretty decent spot in as well. Now, I will say, I do question his target, where obviously he had made it very known to David that he didn't like him and wanted to target him, only for him to then switch to Nicole Anthony by the end of the week. I do think that's a bit questionable, but while he does make a deal with David to try to keep him safe, I don't think that deal is ever going to really follow through if David ever won HOH. So again, I do think that's a bit misguided, but still, I think he comes out of this HOH in a much better spot than he came into it, which is why he's here number 5. Now, number 4, moving on to an HOH that is probably more positive than negative, finally. And at number 4, we do have Shelly from BB17, and Shelly's another one that I think she uses her HOH pretty effectively here. She uses her HOH to really solidify her alliance with the likes of Clay and Vanessa. She also kind of puts herself in the middle of the house, where she still has connections to the James, Meg, and Jason side of things. She still has a relationship with Audrey that she's able to keep in the game to be a target ahead of her. She also builds a relationship with the Austin side of things. Yeah, I think there is some good work here from Shelly in putting her in the middle. However, I do think Vanessa does a better job. I think Vanessa kind of outplays Shelly during this week in kind of allowing Shelly and Clay to make bigger targets of themselves and putting Vanessa in a much more central position, even more so than Shelly. But I do think Shelly does do good work here. Again, she does form numerous alliances. She does take out Davon, who, while someone that wasn't directly coming for her, was coming for Clay, who's obviously an important number for her. So again, it does take her out. It also weakens Davon's side of the house, which makes the numbers a bit more balanced. Now, again, I think an issue is, again, I do think she makes herself a little bit too big of a target through this, to where while she is pretty safe for the short term, eventually, obviously, it does catch up to her. But it's still, again, a solid HOH, one that has her greatly benefiting her position through this week, and because that, for me, it is here number 4. Now, number 3, and we have an HOH that's kind of very similar. I think probably slightly better in the fact that I don't think this person came out of this week as a target really at all for really anybody. And at number 3, we do have Caitlyn from BB23. And I'll be honest, coming into this video, I actually thought Caitlyn would be number 1. Mind you, part of that is because I kind of forgot about the top 2. However, Caitlyn's one that I do constantly remember as one of the better second HOHs. I do remember him kind of taking the reins after Frenchie obviously had his disastrous first HOH, which is probably one of the better points where a second HOH is beneficial for your game, is when the first HOH kind of bombs and doesn't end up forming the structure they need, which will allow you in the second HOH to then form those structures that should have been formed in the first week. And I think Caitlyn mostly does that. I do think the reason why he's not higher on the list, though, is because he does that only for Tiffany to utilize his HOH pretty much better than he does. Where, again, I think this is very similar to the Vanessa and Shelly situation, where while Caitlyn does very good work in building some structures around him. I think Tiffany does it better. And I think Tiffany comes out of this HOH being masterfully positioned in the game. But again, not to take away from Caitlyn. Caitlyn still has a pretty solid week here. Again, he still forms numerous deals that keep him safe moving forward. He takes out the consensus target in Frenchie and gains social capital through that. He also opens up a game relationship with really everyone in the house through having these one-on-one game talks in the way that he does. So again, I think there's a lot to like from Caitlyn here. However, I think in comparison to the top two, who really just run the game for a while following their second HOH, I do feel like Caitlyn, again, kind of just lets Tiffany outposition him during this week, which is a slight negative here to where he's here at number 3. Now, number 2, and again, for me, these top two HOHs were pretty definitive. I feel like these are two that took the second HOH, secured their position in the game, and really just ran the game for a lot of the game following this. However, there's obviously a big difference between the two. So at number 2, we're going to have Paulie Calafiore from BB18. And again, Paulie took this HOH and really ran with it. I mean, he really secures his power structure during this week, which coming into this, he was in on the majority alliance, but he was kind of on the outskirts of it. He really takes his HOH and ends up being in the center of it. Where from this point forward, he really ends up running the game up until the week before his eviction. I think he also makes a pretty optimal move here in taking out his biggest physical threat in the game. And while obviously that ends up backfiring on him, as Victor does later come back into the game, I do think taking Victor out of the game here was a pretty decent move for Paulie. And while you could argue the fact that he could have kept around Victor as a shield, I do think separating Victor and Paul and picking up Paul as a number was also a pretty good move. And I think there's a lot to like from Paulie's HOH reign. I think he's probably the person that gains the most from their HOH, or I think he's probably the person that gains the most from their second HOH, to where again, he's just in this position to really run the game following this while he messes up eventually. Like, I do feel like this was really HOH that really set all that up. And because that, again, I think he played this HOH really well, and that's why he's here number 2. And at number 1, the number 1 second HOH in Big Brother US history ends up being Paul from BB19. And again, like, this HOH from Paul really just allows him to run the game from this point on with almost no adversity, where he obviously comes into his HOH already in a very solid position. He already secured the majority alliance. However, this ends up solidifying it even more. He ends up backdooring Cody during this week, which once Cody goes, he really has the majority of the house on his side. Really, very few people directly targeting him, and even if they do, there's no real way to get him out of the game, which really goes for most of the season. And this is just a pretty perfect HOH, and one that secures his power structure that really just allows him to run the game from this point forward. Now, again, I think there are arguments to be made that someone like a Paulie or someone like a Memphis or even someone like a Caitlyn have benefited their positions more through their HOHs, which is probably true. But again, I do think getting rid of Cody from the game, even though Cody later comes back, obviously just greatly benefits his position. Also, I feel like during this week, he does very good work in building bonds with the Alex and the Jason side of things that really lets him to take full control over the game. So I just feel like he plays this week pretty perfectly, setting himself up to run the entire game, which he later does, and that is why he's here number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my ranking of every second HOH in the history of Big Brother. Again, I kind of like doing these rankings of just these one specific week's worth of gameplay in a person's game. Like, I think it's kind of fun to where, I don't know, maybe I'll do more of these down the road. I don't know what I would do, considering it seems ridiculous to do a third HOH ranking, though I'll be honest, I wouldn't be opposed to it. Obviously, this one's out of the way. Obviously, I have a decent chunk of Big Brother videos still in the works. Good chunk of rankings coming up. My first week ranking, my redos of the season and winner rankings, my who would I vote for. I'm going to do a favorite character of every season video. Again, I have a lot of Big Brother stuff coming up, so stay tuned for all those things. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.